Hey y'all, coming to you from Asheville, North Carolina, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Rafael, Baptista, Strategy and Innovation Director for Buncombe County Government, and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode to you all about AI and ChatGPT and those fun stuff with Dr. Dylan Hayden. Before we get started though, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. It's a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. So let me introduce today's guest, Dr. Dylan Hayden. He is the author of the Public Administrator's Guide to ChatGPT. He is the social science analyst for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and a military veteran. So thank you so much for being on here today.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the meat of AI and all that, we love to do kind of a quick lightning round just to let our audience get to know you a little bit better. So what book, outside of your book that you just wrote, congratulations on that, what book are you reading right now?
So I'm actually, I'm in the middle of two books, but I'm reading Unmasking AI by Joy Buolamwini. Really fascinating, just getting into, understanding a lot of the inherent biases that are encapsulated within a lot of these AI tools and the algorithms that go into how these things operate, and just so getting a real good deep sense of how that factors into the outputs of some of these generative AI tools. It's really fascinating, and and part of that, I also kind of took a step back and went back to reread an old book, Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, talking about, some of the challenges that we have where we put a lot of trust in some of these algorithms and these tools and the over-reliance on them and accepting, the truth or the outputs from these tools as the truth and some of the inherent dangers that go along with that. So, really fascinating stuff.
Awesome. You gotta love when the lightning round also relates to the topic at hand. So moving a little bit from books and new technology to maybe some older technology, if applicable, what was the first album that you ever purchased?
First album was, I'm dating myself here, it was a cassette of Green Day, Dookie, in, what was that, 7th grade, I think. And man, I listened to that thing so much, and then somebody in school stole my Walkman that had my had it in there, and never saw it again.
My first album was, I had a buddy who gave me a mixtape he created and included Green Day on the CD. It had like 3 Green Day songs, and I still have it in my car. I haven't listened to it in like a decade, but I used to listen to that thing all the time, so I'm with you on Green Day there. What's the last thing, movie or TV show that you've watched?
So my wife and I watched the Family Plan the other night with Mark Wahlberg, and I was pleasantly surprised at how funny I found it to be. I wasn't really expecting too much of it, but it was actually, it was pretty funny.
That's good. Family Plan, you said, right?
Yeah.
All right. And where do you go for inspiration?
I take inspiration where I can find it, but I honestly find it on the train. That's where I do some of my best thinking. When I was in grad school and I was living in Philadelphia, I'd actually go and I'd take walks at night, and I'd go and sit in 30th Street Station in Philadelphia and just like look at these giant marble columns and it's like being in a cathedral, man. And I'd sit there at like 11 o'clock, midnight, just thinking about stuff. And, yeah, but just seeing all the people going around doing things. So.
All right. So I think it's a good segue. You're just talking about what inspires you, but I think you're becoming a voice of inspiration in the AI space for the public administrators. So when I started co-hosting GovLove, one of the things I said is I want to do an episode on AI, and I want to do an episode that really helps people understand what AI is, what it isn't, how to use it, when to be worried about it, and all that stuff. And I was trying to think of who's the right person to bring on to have that conversation. And I kept seeing your LinkedIn post pop up. I was like, I think this is the guy. So I've definitely learned a thing or two from your posts. But maybe we could get started with just talking about your journey with AI. My understanding is you were a linguist specialist for the U.S. military at some point, and now you are a PhD, you're a graduate instructor, you're working for the federal government, and an author of an AI book. Like, what got you into this AI space?
I've always been, fascinated with technology, and, that was one of the things that drew me to being a cryptologist in the Navy, was just being around some, what I thought would be some cutting edge technology. As you find out once you're in the military, you're like, oh, it's cutting edge 5 years ago. In a lot of cases, it's a mix. But I got to do some cool stuff, and I be around some really just smart, people who don't think linearly, like, and so just that sort of built my fascination with technology and emerging technologies and different tools. And when I was working in state government, I taught myself to be a data analyst because that was what the role I was in required. And I didn't really have, I had the analytical background from being a linguist and being a cryptologist, but, applying it to, the New York State Department of Labor and criminal justice reform and things like that. Like, that was a totally new avenue for me. So just trying to learn about how to make tools better and how to get answers and make some data driven decisions. And so, it's just been a long standing fascination of mine. And I think throughout all my work, I helped start the first data analytics team in the Office of Fair Housing at HUD, and I just try to stay up to date with whatever new is coming out. And then ChatGPT comes on the scene, and I had already been studying about like machine learning and different algorithms and things like that, and then like this generative AI, atom bomb just drops on the world. And I was like, man, this is my moment. I'm like, this is the new thing. So I'm loving it.
Awesome. So generative AI comes out. It's this atom bomb. It comes out at least for most of us who are not living the machine learning data world day to day. It felt like it came out of nowhere. I'm sure it didn't. But for our audience, a lot of whom probably have heard of ChatGPT, maybe have not used it. Can you just help define what is generative AI? Like, what fundamentally is it? How does it generally work?
Right. So
is it Skynet?
So, artificial intelligence in some form, has been around for over 60 years. It's been developing over time, and you've developed, machine learning and these processes. But what's different between, I guess, what you would call like traditional AI and generative AI is, you would take, how can I break that down? You're creating something, you're using AI to create something completely new. Whereas before you were looking at something that already existed, right? You were taking data that you would take a data set and you would try and, use it to analyze things, large data sets, even, faster than a human could. You could use statistical analysis to make certain, predictions about things. But now here is this thing that it's being trained that, and using what they call neural networks and deep learning to essentially trained just like a person, essentially. So it has sort of this ability to now make connections that without you having to actually input those connections in there, and it will generate new outputs. It'll create things that don't exist or didn't exist before. So that's sort of the next level here.
So, we got you into the AI. It's this neural network. It's all things you just mentioned, right? And what does it look like now? Like, what are the things that we're really seeing it being used for? Like, when I think of ChatGPT, what should I be thinking of? I'm trying to think of the right way to ask this question. What can it do for me? Like, why should I be interested in this?
Well, it can do quite a lot if you put yourself in the right mindset, the right framework. So, ChatGPT started where it was primarily just it's a large language model, so it's built on a large body, pretty much the vast majority of the internet. All that data, all that language has been scraped, and it understands that sort of the context of different words, right? So it can, you can give it a prompt and tell it to, write something for you, to draft, what a lot of the cases people talk about is like, help you redraft an email, or, give you a list of items that, could help you with a particular process or something. And it can help you, like, brainstorm new ideas, and it's very good at doing that. One of the things that drove me towards, writing the book was that I saw when ChatGPT came out, like, and you started to see, as people started really kind of get used to it, like, all the information coming out about it and how to use it and how to be effective on it was all geared towards profit making ventures. Like, here's how you can use ChatGPT to become a millionaire in like 12 hours. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, but there was no sort of, there was nothing, you watch YouTube videos, there's no benevolent use of, like, how can this actually be used for good to help people, right? And in the world of government and the public sector, like, here's this amazing tool that can now help be a force multiplier to help us, with certain processes and, helping customer service and all these other things. And there was nothing out there about how you could actually do that. So I think that's where I was like, okay, somebody needs to look into this.
So in the process of doing the research and writing the book, did you get to an understanding what the state of AI in local government is? Like, do you have a sense, or in the broader, public administration, public sector space, what would you say the state of AI is?
It's a mix, because, there's plenty of people across the entire public sector who, they do have that sort of, enterprising entrepreneurial spirit where it's like, man, I want to build this cool tool that's going to make our agency like really help people, and like we can improve this, and we can make whatever, streamline this process, like, and there's people who really want to do those things, but in terms of adoption, by the nature of what we do in public service, we're required to take things much slower than you see in the private sector, right? As much as we would love to just be on the forefront of innovation, we can't adopt that, move fast and break things mentality that they have in Silicon Valley, because when you're dealing with serving the public, you can't break things, right? That's the taxpayers, that's the people you serve. So yeah. There's actual humans on the other end of that, and there could be real consequences for when you break things. So we have to, by the nature of our work, we have to go much slower, and that's frustrating for a lot of people. But so there's those two things are always in tension, right? The caution of public sector prudence and governance, and then, that strive to still innovate and improve, and advance, technology. So, but you see, a lot of cities now, they're starting to develop, AI policies, around security and ethics and ethical use. And, so you look at like New York City and Boston, and, I think even like Spokane, Washington, and a couple other places, like there's a lot of places that are starting to, develop policies around this, because they understand it's not going away. So you got to figure out how to use it now, right? So,
the how to use it now. I had a team at my workplace that told me that the staff took a vote and they voted to not pursue looking and learning about AI. I'm like, that's a very interesting vote you decided to take. Didn't know that was a vote y'all were entitled to take. But I think it goes to the point where people are scared, right? There's a lot of people who are scared of AI, and there's a lot of people who are really excited. So I would say most of our audience is probably folks who've heard a little bit about AI, don't really know it very well. So as they're thinking about, do I adopt? Do I not adopt? Can you speak a little bit to, I think part of the point of, you mentioned, it's not going away, but maybe some encouragement for why you should consider AI. I'm assuming that if you're listening to a podcast about AI in government, you're at least partially interested in AI in government. Right. If you're not, maybe we can convert you, but I do wonder why you're listening to this particular episode.
Right. That's a good point. I think why people should adopt it is because, especially if you're scared, well, we're scared because things are unfamiliar to us, right? That's why we're scared of anything, because it's not familiar to us, and we don't understand it, and we don't understand how it works. The more you can familiarize yourself with it, then that really, that takes away a lot of the anxiety around it. But also, as we can see, any tool can be used either for good or for bad, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have people out there trying to learn how to use it for good purposes, well, that just leaves the bad guys, right? And if they're using a tool that gives them a great advantage, then you're setting yourself up to be taken advantage of. And I don't like being in that position. I like knowing what other people are trying, if people are going to use things for different causes. I want to kind of have an understanding of the landscape, and know how to operate in what is definitely a new environment that we have. I think understanding like the genie's not going back in the bottle, right? We have a completely new landscape that is going to be defined by AI tools. So as scary as that sounds, I think arming yourself with knowledge is the best thing that you can do to help you adapt to this new environment.
All right. I think that's a good answer. So let's work on arming our audience with some knowledge about how they can use AI. And I'll start by saying I always think about AI from an enterprise and from an individual level, right? How can my organization use AI as an enterprise? How can I, as one cog in the bigger wheel of my organization, use AI for my work? So maybe let's start with the individual and roll up to the enterprise, right? Because you mentioned earlier New York City and Boston, these big cities with their fancy chief innovation officers and all these chief roles. Most of our folks work for smaller local governments. They're a recreations park manager, a supervisor, right? They're not a social scientist. Gotta say, I love a job title. I want to be a social scientist. Can you speak to a little bit about how some of the use cases for your standard public administrator, right, who's not an analyst in their role, how can they use preferably free tools to be better at work?
Yeah. If you're looking at like ChatGPT, right, there is the free version and then there's the paid premium version. And that's going to be the model with every AI tool that comes out now, right? Because they want you to get on board. So it's that freemium type of deal. Yeah. So you have the slightly diminished service for the free version. But still, even when ChatGPT first came out, all they had was what's called the GPT 3.5 language model. That was what was introduced to the broader public, and when it came out, it was phenomenal. And did things that nobody could do before. You could give it a prompt, and it would write stuff. I mean, I developed content for an entire website in about an hour a year ago in December while I was sitting on the couch at my in-laws for Christmas. And that blew my mind. And then in the early spring, they introduced the premium model, and then they created a large language model, which is the GPT-4 model, which has, it's just trained on a larger corpus of data. So that and then, now it's added new tools like plugins and all these other things. And so those benefits go to the people who pay for them, but you could still use ChatGPT with this incredible GPT 3.5 model, which is actually, it's faster because since it's smaller, it doesn't have to think as hard. So it gives you relatively quick responses. And for most day-to-day activities, like, redrafting an email, giving you, ideas for, how to, if you have, say, a press release that needs to go out and you want to, double check that your language is inclusive and, like those types of things, you could run it past that and it does a phenomenal job. Now you have other tools. So like, since Microsoft is a major player, and big backer of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, they have all the same tools. So now that GPT-4 model is integrated into Microsoft Bing, into their search engine. So you can use Bing Chat if you don't pay for the premium version of ChatGPT, you could use Bing Chat. You're using essentially the same language model. The image generation tools that ChatGPT has, the DALL-E 3, you can use that on Bing Chat for free. Google Bard, their version, that's free. You can go to, Google Bard, and it has a lot of the same capabilities, except when you're talking about these large language models, what it is, for the last 20 plus years, we've gotten used to this concept of a search engine, right? Like, you go to Google and it indexes websites all across the internet, and it has this, this basic understanding of like what all is out there, and you're searching for something that exists. That's a totally different type of algorithm engine out there. Now you have this thing that's called a reasoning engine, right? Where it's taking knowledge, but it's making new connections to generate something new. And that's the generative AI. What Google did, and this is also what Microsoft did with their Bing Chat, is they basically paired their search engine with their reasoning engine. So one of the sticking points that a lot of people have was that these language models, they're only trained up to a certain point. So the data in them could be, as of, I think with ChatGPT, it's up to like April of 2023. So if you ask for more current information, it won't have it. But now if you pair it with, if you pair this type of language model with a search engine like Google, it can bring in additional, more current information from the internet, which makes it an incredibly powerful tool. And that's free. Claude by Anthropic, which was founded by two people who left OpenAI, helped create ChatGPT. They created their own version at Anthropic. That's a fantastic tool. There's a bunch out there, and there's a lot of free stuff that you can use that can really help you dip your toes, and get a sense of how these things work.
All right. So you mentioned, a lot of the tools. You talked a little about how to use it to communicate and all that. Are these tools you can use for, brainstorming, for, what are some of the different types of broad buckets that I might use in my work life?
So, just thinking back to, some of the examples I came up with, use cases, in my book, and, the way I approached it in my book was, I didn't have the benefit of these tools when I was working in my previous positions, right? When I was working in the governor's office in New York 10 years ago, there was no large language model that I could just have it develop these things for me. But, I was in a situation, I was at the Department of Labor, and Hurricane Sandy had just hit, and knocked out, New York City, Long Island, and like all of our career centers, the one-stop career centers downstate, they were all shut down because they didn't have power, they didn't have water, and our employees, they didn't have anywhere they couldn't get to the office. But now FEMA was setting up all these disaster assistance centers around New York City and Long Island, and people needed to file for disaster unemployment. So we had our staff go out to these disaster centers, these sort of like field, places, and we had to set them up with things like, a laptop and like a data hotspot and forms and papers. And you would think, because New York has had past disasters, we had Tropical Storm Irene and Lee like the year before, like they had dealt with these things. But the person who did that had retired. There was nothing left over. It was a binder that was like in a drawer somewhere. So I had to basically create these go kits from scratch with like, here's step-by-step directions of like, here's what you should be considering when you set up in a disaster center. Well, if I had something, and it took me, because I was just doing it by myself, like it took me several days. Well, that's a lot of time when you're dealing with a disaster recovery situation. If I had something like ChatGPT and I could say, hey, act as an emergency response, professional. I have, or I guess I said Department of Labor Career Services employee. I forget how I phrased it, but you're going to be staffing a disaster assistance center. This is the equipment that you have. You have a laptop, you have a data card, you have pens, you have forms. What are some things you should consider? Boom, it spits out a list. What are the steps you should take to set up at your disaster center? And it gives you, so when you're dealing with somebody who is now in that situation, now they have this go-to list that basically reduces the cognitive load on them in this highly stressful situation. And it's like, how can you help customers in this particular situation? Well, they're, the people coming in filing for disaster unemployment, like, they're under incredible stress. It's the middle of a disaster. They're out of work. Their house might be flooded. Who knows? So it's not as simple as them just coming into an office and you say, fill out this form. Like, you have to show empathy and care. So having those little reminders and just having this sort of checklist to go by, being able to spit that out in like 30 seconds, that's phenomenal. I wish I could have done that 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite examples that I wrote about in the book.
So to make these examples work, though, it's my understanding, my experience with ChatGPT is the quality of what I get out of the system is directly related to the quality of what I put in, right? This idea
Absolutely.
of the prompt.
Right.
So I think that's where, when I talk to people who, they've played around with them and they're like, I'm not very impressed. And then I look at their prompts, I'm like, oh, I kind of understand why it's not very impressive to you. Can you speak a little bit about this notion of prompts, right? I remember when Netflix had a job posting for a prompt engineer making $1 million.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone thought it was crazy. But it speaks to the importance of prompts, right? So can you speak a little bit to that?
So when you're talking about prompting, remember, you're interacting with a machine that instead of using a programming language like Python, for example, you're using natural language. It understands it. It's natural language processing is what this thing does. So you are now a programmer and you are instructing a computer to perform a specific task the same way that you would if you were writing it in Python and you were giving it a very specified set of instructions. But you're just doing it in plain language. So the importance of being absolutely clear in what you're telling it to do is going to determine the output. Now, I get into sort of some of the frameworks that help you, understand prompting, like, things like giving the AI a persona, right? Telling it to adopt a persona. What you're basically doing is, since it has this large volume of knowledge that is stored, you want to sort of narrow the scope for it to make it, really just use the most relevant information that it can. So I don't want, if I'm asking a question about emergency management, I don't want it, using computational power thinking about, chocolate chip cookie recipes. So telling it to act as a fire chief or a park and recreational aid or something, like, it frames that knowledge based on text that it has gained in that particular knowledge sphere. So, but really it's about being detailed, I think a good way to frame it, that I've heard is, think of it as a very good intern, right? So and this is something for, especially when you're talking about leadership, like, and management, it's just like having really good people skills and having that sort of that ability to delegate certain tasks. You want something done properly and you want it done a certain way. You can't be vague in the directions that you give it, right? So if you were talking to an intern and you say, I want you to, gather XYZ information and draft up a report using you explain how you want it to be performed. You explain what the output should look like and the way they should give it to you, and the way it's sort of packaged. And the clearer you are, the better the result you're going to get. You're still, and this gets to the whole thing with these AI tools, you're not relying on it to create the finished product for you. Just as, if you were an executive, if you were a senior executive in any enterprise and you had an intern draft up a report to you, if you're a city manager, you're not just going to like, oh yeah, my intern drafted this. You're not just going to slap your name on it and hand it off to the city council and say, this is the status of, our city. No, you're going to review it. You're going to make your own revisions. You're going to rewrite, certain aspects. You're going to tweak it. You're going to adjust. You may go back to your intern and say, this is a very good first draft. Can you make XYZ changes? So sort of that multi-shot prompting, you're telling it to go back and start to, refine the output. So thinking it as in that way, as an assistant, because that's what it is. It's there to assist you.
I like that metaphor of the intern. And also one thing I really like about ChatGPT, and I never really thought about this until someone told me this morning actually. They're like, what the best thing about ChatGPT compared to a Google search is? I'm like, I have no idea what's the best thing. They're like, the conversation's ongoing. They're like, you put a search in Google, it doesn't pull what you want, and you got to start all over. With ChatGPT, you just tell it to refine. You ask follow-ups. It's a conversation.
Yeah. Except now with Google, now that they have Google Bard and they've tied it in with their search, like some of the things you can do, like, the tools that are tied in, you think like Google Scholar. Now you have this entire library of all this scholarly research that Google already has indexed in their scholarly, search engine, paired with this assistant, this super high powered assistant. And you could say, you may not, almost like searching, you can say, I need you to define, find me, the latest research in the last 10 years of, around, housing choice vouchers, in Minneapolis. I don't know. Really refine it. And in a way that you can't really type that in with keywords in a search engine, right? But you can describe what it is that you're really looking for, and it's going to go out and it's going to do that searching and compiling and packaging all in one. And you can say, give me an output where you say, and that's the difference, is you tell it to generate the output in the way that you want. So you could say, I want a list of 10 journal articles that I want them formatted where it's the title, the URL, so I have a link to it, and then like a 1 to 2 sentence summary of what it is. And it'll give you that. Now you basically have your sort of your simple go-to list that you can now do the research. You can go back and, read those things at length, but you have the link there for it. So yeah, I mean that I've used that in some of my research, using that sort of technique. Yeah, there's a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's I feel like every time I play around with it, I learn something new. Anytime I see one of your posts or someone else's post, I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. I'll have to try that out. So I think we've talked a good bit about how I as an individual can use AI, but let's shift gears a little bit and say, how can I as a city, as a county, as the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, how can I use AI? Like, if I'm an enterprise leader, how am I thinking about an AI strategy?
Yeah, there's a reason they're hiring chief AI officers right now to think about these things, right? Uh, you know, I think as a strategy, again, this gets back to the nature of being in public service. You have to come at it from a framework of safety, of data security, and ethical use, right? And equitable use. And so as a leader, if you're looking to implement like an AI policy, these are the questions. This is where the knowledge base where your questions need to be coming from, is from that area of how can we use this in a way that protects people's personal information, that make sure that we don't incorporate any PII, how do we make sure that it doesn't cause any harm to any marginalized groups? Those types of questions are the things you need to be asking when you're trying to develop a policy. In terms of actually just using the tools across an enterprise, looking at some of the use cases, one of the big things is, you now have this ability. One of the challenges particularly in government, and this has been a major trend over the past 25, 30 years, is so much more outsourcing to contractors to do specialized tasks that government employees used to do, right? And for things like programming, even for relatively simple programs, it's like, oh, well, we don't know anybody who knows how to write a line of code, so we need to spend $50,000 to hire some contractor for the next 6 months to write this simple program for us. Well, now, because these large language models have been trained on GitHub and all these other, these data repositories where people have written every type of code imaginable that's out there, ChatGPT itself was built. It was built using Python as its core language. So if you wanted to generate code to do a particular task, that's something that you can ask it to do, and it's actually very good at that. When I first came to the Office of the Chief Data Officer, I was not a programmer. I was not a coder. My background is in public administration. I've always technology is an interest of mine, so this is something, and the data analytics part I understood, but I wasn't a coder, and I set out to teach myself Python because I'm like, this is going to be very relevant in my field. But there was, there's a learning curve there, and then ChatGPT comes on the scene, and like, boom, my learning curve just like skyrocketed, because now you have this sort of reinforcement learning where I can experiment with little projects for the minor tasks that we don't want to contract out. And I can say, hey, we got this problem in our office that I think we have, I can write a program that might help, automate some process. Let me try it. And I'd start writing, I'd give ChatGPT the instructions, and I'd say, write and generate a Python script that'll do this. And it'll do it, and I'd try and run it, and it would give me an error, and it would say it doesn't work because this. So I'd take the error, and I'd plug it back into ChatGPT. I said, hey, I got this error and I don't understand why. Explain it to me. And it gives you an explanation. It says, oh, you should try to. So then I'd fix whatever that problem was. And I'd say, can you rewrite the code for me now that you have this understanding? It would give me a new code. And it would I'd keep going back and forth, this sort of chain prompting. And as I did that, I was learning myself, like, oh, this is what a for loop does, and this is what a function is in Python, and this is how you can use these things. And my knowledge started to increase rapidly, in a way that I was not going to get in the past. So at an enterprise level, things like developing custom training programs, where normally you would have to hire out, a particular contractor. Like, you can now bring that knowledge and create a custom training specific to your staff and what their needs are, and developing a course, even if it's a PowerPoint, lesson or something, you can now develop customized training specific to the needs of your office, your team, specific to the task that they're trying to do, instead of, paying through the nose for, some generalized training. So that right there is, a major cost savings for governments, for local governments particularly.
Not to mention the reduction of headaches of having to deal with contracts.
Yes.
So I think that's really interesting. I love some of the examples they used around this enterprise approach, and hopefully people really took note of it, because I think there's a lot of good ideas there. And I think it's a good segue into this, to a conversation of, all right, AI is really cool. Like, this is some really exciting stuff. That being said, whenever there's a new technology or any technology, we probably have to have some parameters around it, right? So I was thinking maybe we could speak a little bit about, too, what are some things to keep in mind when I'm developing an AI strategy? You've talked some about it, but what are some things? Maybe let's start with the individual level, right? That's how we started the previous conversation. I'm an individual using AI at work. What should I probably not do?
I would say you would not want to use like internal or protected data that you don't want out in the public domain just yet, if it's ready for prime time, right? Anything that's confidential information that contains, PII, if you have a program that, or if you have some sort of public service that captures data on, names and addresses and, tax information, anything like that, like, you don't want to just plug that into a model like ChatGPT, because once it's in it, now it's in the model, and now it is no longer yours. It's in the world of it's scraped up. So you still have to take those basic cybersecurity measures into play the way you would even if it wasn't an AI tool. But and that's why, like, most of, all my experimentation that I've done with it is with publicly available data. And so this is sort of the other, side of the coin is, the more governments can make data available to the extent possible and have open data, then that now it breaks down a lot of the silos between different, departments that may not communicate. Now you can have, sort of a single repository, and if it's in the public domain, now you're taking that, a lot of that worry about some of the security issues off the table. And if you can use that information to enhance service delivery or programs, and you can say, okay, well, here's the last 10 years of reports of how we've, provided this particular service. And now you go to ChatGPT and say, I really want to understand and evaluate the effectiveness of this program. let's take that data and let's write create a program, write a Python program or something that can crunch those numbers, do sort of do a regression analysis and say, okay, well, here's where we're going to be 5 years from now.
Yeah.
But you can do it so much faster. So I think, that open data component is a big part of it. But yeah, I think just avoiding using, internal proprietary information unless, you have now, like OpenAI is developing, they have ChatGPT Enterprise, which, they say, I don't know for certain, but, they say that they don't train their models using the information used through ChatGPT Enterprise accounts. Same thing with their API. People want to develop tools using their API and using this language model, but they don't want to, if they're starting a business, they don't want their proprietary information just going to ChatGPT. So they have this promise from OpenAI that says, well, we won't use that particular data, what you plug in there. So having that, making sure you have that assurance, that's one possibility. So.
All right. I put information in. I ask it to, give me a recommendation about something, gives me a recommendation. Should I assume that what, these chatbots give me is correct? Should I take anything they say with a grain of salt, right? You mentioned that you had the intern metaphor earlier, right? How much should I trust the results of this in terms of helping me make decisions?
That's a very good point because, the concern that people have is around what's called hallucinations, which is when it puts out bogus information and, and stuff that's not factual. So to understand how these things work, it's statistical analysis at a basic level where based on all of its background knowledge and data, if you put in a prompt, it's essentially doing a statistical probability of what the next word, the next sentence will be. Well, just like with it's a probability, it's an estimate. So it's taking a very educated guess of what you want to see. It doesn't have absolute certainty. So, if you say, give me a recipe for chocolate chip, it's going to guess you're asking for cookies. It could be brownies. Who knows? But it's taking that probability and say, well, the most likely probable next word is going to be cookies, and this is a very simplistic, example. But it might not be correct. So you have to use, you always have to take a critical eye with any output that it produces. Double check the facts. You do your own due diligence. The same as you would if an intern handed you a report. You want to verify that the information they handed you, you always want to double check. I think there was the example of the lawyer in New York that he didn't understand how ChatGPT worked, and he filed, and this was in the Avianca case, the client was injured on Avianca Airlines, and he was suing the airline, and the lawyer filed a brief in federal court, and he cited past precedent, and he submitted it to the judge, and then the lawyers for Avianca came back and they said, hey, judge, we're looking at this brief and we can't find any of these cases. And the judge goes to the plaintiff's attorney and says, hey, where did you get these cases? He says, oh, I had ChatGPT do it. It's like, yeah, you've been practicing law for like 30 years. You think like you know a thing or two about due diligence, but he didn't do it, right?
Yeah,
You just
definitely.
relied on the tool as the
Yeah.
absolute truth, which you never do. You cannot do that.
Yeah. And I think what you just said there, right? Don't rely on the tool. You think of it AI as a tool, right? That's what it is.
Right.
I think some people want to think it's more than that, right? It's the solution to everything when it's a tool to help you do your job or your life a little better.
It's the carpenter that builds the house, not the hammer.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm a local government professional. I'm listening to this. I'm like, you know what, Dylan? I'm bought in. I'm to become an expert on AI. What do I do now? What's my next step? Right? I should probably read the public administrators, your book on public administrators guide to AI, right? That's going to be one step, but what are some other steps I should take?
I mean, there's so much out there now. And part of the reason is everybody's got this incredible content generating AI tool. So now anybody can create, training on, hey, here's how I use it to do this particular task. And so it's becoming much more nuanced, and you can start to find more information that, YouTube, right? The University of YouTube is like where everybody goes to learn just about everything these days. But now there's so many programs like Microsoft, because Microsoft owns LinkedIn, right? And so Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning, they did, and it's still free, I believe, through the end of next year. They have it's called AI generative AI career essentials or something, but it's a Microsoft certification program. That is well worth the taking a day to go through that, do those modules, do those quizzes, learn what a reasoning engine is, learn how it uses k nearest neighbor to make these sort of connections, and like understand how the algorithms work. Having that fundamental background knowledge will really help you interact with these tools better. And you're investing what? A day of your time. I think that's worth it,
I'll take it.
Yeah. And now, I think Stanford has some training out there. MIT has some training out there. Now everybody's getting on this. So there's so much more. There are so many more resources. Like you just point your finger in any direction and you're going to hit something.
Yeah. One of the things when my kind of experimenting with AI, which is nowhere near what you've done, is I just play around and say, I wonder if it could do this for me. And I play around with it. And one of the things I've realized is the things either I hate doing or the things I'm not particularly good at are where I find ChatGPT adds the most value, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't need something to tell me how to create a performance measure. I can do that. I do that all day. But if I need to write an RFP template for something, and I do that once a year, ChatGPT is my best friend.
Yeah. And another great use is like when you're talking about performance measures, because I come from a performance management background too. A great thing about a generative AI tool is it's there sort of as that, not necessarily conscience, but I'm trying to think, using it as sort of like that advisor to fill in the blind spots. So you may be trying to measure the performance of a particular program, and you came up with, okay, here's like 5 key performance indicators. Well, you could go to your AI tool and you could say, what am I not looking at? What am I missing? What are some things that I might not be considering as I look at this problem? And it might spit out a whole bunch of new ideas that you're like, oh wow, I never even thought of that.
Yep.
You
I
know?
actually just created a bot, they call it, what's it, GBT, and
Yeah.
in the system. And I said, hey, I'm creating a new strategic plan for my organization, creating new business plans, and equity is really important this time around for our organization. Hey, I'm going to give you goals, and I'm going to tell you what I want to achieve. I want you to give me performance measures that are equity informed. because I'm not very
That
good.
sounds like a good tool to me.
Yeah, and I tried it out, and it was kind of interesting because I'm not sure I would always use the measures it gave me, but it gave me things to think about and have conversations with my departments. And I'm like, this is really helpful.
Yeah.
So,
I think, and this was just, you got going back to a previous question you asked about, implementing it at a leadership, at an enterprise level. One of the things you're starting to see now, particularly across the federal government, we have an AI community of practice. And so we have, monthly calls now. And there's, it's a group of people who, you have people who are innovating in different spaces and their different agencies coming up with, with things and being able to share that knowledge across different domains is huge. And I think, but also internally within our own agency, I don't know what we're calling it. It's not a community of practice, but it's essentially a community of practice. But it's like a monthly AI interest call for anybody across all of HUD. Doesn't matter what program office you're in. It's there for, people who are really interested in this topic and want to learn more. And for anyone in a leadership position in government, the more you can foster that type of, just that show your support for that type of organic collection across different departments or, internal organizations or across different agencies, say within a county or a state government or something, looking across different agencies and creating those types of, collaborative, idea mills, for lack of a better term. I think that's where you're going to get the most innovation, and you're going to get people to adopt it more.
what I feel like I'm hearing is this notion of, hey, it's important to have community. It's important to have forums. Go learn on LinkedIn and YouTube, but also talk to people at work, right? And as an individual, do that. And as a leader, build those spaces, right, for people.
Yeah. And it's getting back to my time in the military. It's lead from the front, right? So, you look within the federal space, the senior executive service, they have what's called the executive core qualifications. And one of those factors is technical competence. You have to have some, technical competence. And so here is this major innovation that is reshaping so much of society. As a person in a leadership position, you should be trying to be as knowledgeable as you can so that when people in your organization, managers, come up and they say, hey, my staff is using this in a certain way, like, you have the knowledge base to say, okay, that's good, but let's think about this in a more, systematic way, how we can incorporate this, put in the proper safeguards, put in the, adopt the right procedures to make sure that we're not using it or causing any harm or putting out information that is not factually correct. Because if you're putting out something that's official for your agency or your department, it needs to be right. We don't get to move fast and break things. It's got to be right the first time. So, yeah.
Well, this has been I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. One thing we haven't really done, we've kind of referenced this, your book. Can you tell a little bit about kind of why someone should be interested in reading your book and kind of where they can get your book?
So, thanks. As far as, why they should read it, I think I tried to focus on, people, regardless of where you are within the field of public administration, whether you're in a nonprofit or if you're in local government or in state government or even in the federal government, wherever you find yourself, there's I wanted to give you the basic fundamentals of like, here's sort of the on-ramp. Like, this thing's moving fast and it's advancing all the time. And I even say that in my introduction. I'm like, the tool advanced faster than I could actually write this. So I felt like anything that I was going to, when I put pen to paper, it was going to be obsolete. But there are certain fundamentals that you can still learn that will help you interact no matter how much, all the extra widgets that come out, whether it's, the ChatGPT plugins or whether it's this new functionality, understanding the basics of like how to interact in this new type of environment with a generative AI tool, regardless of whether it's ChatGPT or Bing or, whatever. That hasn't changed. So giving people that on-ramp to say, okay, here's how you start to dip your toes, and depending on where you are, here's some potential use cases, just to seed that in your mind. Like, and again, I came from the framework of I didn't have these tools in the past in my, my previous iterations throughout my career. But if I did, here is how I would have used it in particular scenarios taken from my personal experience. And I think that just, seeing it in that particular context, I think really makes it real for people. Because I've been there, I've done a lot of those things, the same things that, a lot of your listeners do every single day. So I think, and I think that's what gives probably most of the readers the most value. As far as finding it, I mean, it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble. You can, just look for the Public Administrator's Guide to ChatGPT, and it will be there. So.
All right. Well, sounds good. So the last question is always the really high stakes questions. People get a little nervous about it. But if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for this episode?
Ooh.
Your walkout song.
My walkout song.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I don't know why, but for some reason when you said walkout song, like, I just have like a mashup of like some AC/DC in my head right now. And I don't know, Thunderstruck? I don't know.
Thunderstruck by AC/DC.
Sure, why not? Right. I mean.
Well, that brings our episode for today to an end. Thank you, Dylan, for coming on and talking with me. Just a reminder, GovLove is brought to you by ALGL, and the best way to support ALGL is to become an ALGL member. You can reach us at elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at GovLove Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. Tell a friend about it. And spread the word about it. Thanks for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast by local government.